Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing another recent reads video where I will be wrapping up the last 5 books that I read, or actually the last 5 before the last 5 books that I read, because yes, I have read that much lately. Okay, so kicking things off, I'm going to be talking about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel novel that came out that predates the Hunger Games trilogy, and we are following our protagonist, Coriolanus Snow, and it goes into depth about his involvement in the games and the way that he has helped shape them into the games that we come to know once Katniss is involved in them. So we read this for our June pick for the Sartorial Geek Book Club, and it was really fun to read it along with other people, but I personally seemed to have a more mixed opinion than everyone else in the group. A lot of people seemed to really love it, but I unfortunately just didn't. I felt like reading this was an interesting experience because on the one hand, it was interesting to see what Snow contributed to the Hunger Games, but on the other hand, I hate Snow, so I didn't love reading from his perspective, and anytime there was like a hint of something to make him slightly sympathetic, which I don't think that Suzanne Collins did on the whole, like I just don't see anyone reading this and being like, I love Snow, he's a great guy, but anytime there was like a hint of something challenging that happened toward him when you would feel like the tiniest ping of sympathy, I would be like, no, I don't like him and I'm not gonna feel bad for him no matter what you tell me he's been through. And then another thing that I did really enjoy about it is all of the Easter eggs that were in here from the original trilogy. So just different parallels that we didn't see before, and also clearly Snow is predestined to hate Katniss based on the events of this book. He has like a personal vendetta against District 12 and against Katniss, who is a character that was definitely reminiscent of Lucy Gray, who we meet in this book, who is the tribute from District 12 that actually gets assigned to Snow as his tribute. He's the sponsor for that tribute. I do think that Suzanne Collins did a good job of giving us glimpses into Snow's psyche and seeing the progression of his character from teenager to adult. There are definite reactions that Snow had to situations that seemed like reactions he would have in the future too. And there were some things that he did where I was just like rolling my eyes so hard, or different thoughts that he had. Anytime that he was helpful to anyone, it wasn't just out of like being a good person and trying to do something nice. There was always some ulterior motive that would benefit him in some way. He always had something else in the back of his mind and some plan or some reason why doing this thing could potentially benefit him in the future. And then another thing that I did really enjoy was Lucy Gray. I thought that her and her family were really kind of what kept me going throughout this book. I found them to be really interesting, and also, again, connections between them and potentially between Katniss. People in the group have talked about some of the theories that have popped up online, and I totally subscribe to the one about Maud Ivory, but I won't go into detail about what that is because I don't want to spoil anything. Then coming to the actual games in the book, because we do see a Hunger Games play out, I didn't feel super attached or excited during it because I felt like a lot of the tributes were kind of interchangeable with one another. With the exception of Lucy Gray from District 12 and Marcus, I didn't really feel like I got to know any of the tributes, and I didn't feel very invested during their games. I obviously felt horrible about what was happening and that these poor teenagers were being put through this experience, but they kind of were all interchangeable with the exception of the 2 tributes that I mentioned. I did really like Coriolanus's friend, Sejanus. He was a really interesting character, and pretty much the entire book I was just dreading whatever was going to happen to him because we hadn't ever heard about him, so he, in my mind, was probably not going to be someone that made it until the ending, and he just seemed to have a conscience, which didn't really fit in with the lifestyle of the capital. So overall, I was kind of disappointed with this one because I felt like there was potential for it to offer a lot of insight into the games and to have a lot of social commentary, but I think it was really lacking. So I liked the connections between this one and the original trilogy, and I liked getting to know Lucy. I didn't like reading from Snow's perspective, and I just didn't feel like this book was necessary, and I don't feel like it really enriched the lore of the Hunger Games, in my opinion. Because I enjoy the original trilogy, I found it easier to get myself to continue reading, whereas if this had been like a new world where I had no prior knowledge, I don't necessarily know that this is something that I would have been very invested in and would have finished reading. I read it just for those connections to the original trilogy. So I don't think that it was a bad book. I think it was entertaining, but I think that it kind of missed the mark and it could have been so much more than it actually was. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. This book I really enjoyed. This is an adult romance novel, and we are following 2 characters. So we have January and we have Gus, or Augustus. The 2 of them went to college together and were in creative writing classes with one another, but they never really got along. They were always kind of enemies, at least from January's perspective. And then flash forward, they're both published authors, but both of them have a lot of personal issues that are going on and they're affecting their ability to write. So they end up finding themselves as next door neighbors in this coastal town called North Bear Shores. And the 2 of them come up with this contest where Gus, who normally writes literary fiction, has to write a romance novel, and January, who normally writes romance novels, has to write a literary fiction novel. Whoever can sell their novel first wins, and the other person will have to promote their book during tours and interviews and all of that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting to see both of these characters, not only with their personal struggles, but also how they took their knowledge and applied it to a genre that they weren't used to writing. One of my favorite things about this book had to be the setting. I really love reading books that are set in small coastal towns. I just find them to be so charming. And there is a character in here named Pete who owns the bookstore, and she's also like the world's worst barista, and she lived in my dream house, which is a pink Victorian. I have looked at so many listings of pink Victorian houses and just dreamed of living in one in the future. Who knows if I'll ever get to do that, but I was so excited getting to like have scenes inside of Pete's house and just imagining to be there. That gave me so much pleasure. I really liked the relationship between January and Gus. I felt like they had a really mature romance and they were really open with one another and they were good about communicating and calling each other out when one of them maybe wasn't communicating the best. They just resolved things really quickly and maturely. Also, it was just so cute. Like, I just really loved the romance between them, and I loved getting to know Gus's perspective on their past together. Like, one of my favorite things too was how they were next door neighbors, and obviously everyone has cell phones and technology, but they would be writing and they would have notebooks. They would write handwritten signs in Sharpie and hold them up through the window so that they could see them instead of like texting each other, and I thought that was really cute. And I also really liked the friendship between January and her best friend. That was largely conveyed like via text messages, but I thought that they were really supportive of one another, and I really loved any time that they would interact. But overall, I really loved this book. I thought there was a great balance between real life personal issues and the romance between characters. I just loved it from start to finish. It was written so wonderfully. I just immediately got sucked into it and I loved it. I finished it so quickly because I could not put it down, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Then I read You Say It First by Katie Cotugno. So I can pretty much always count on Katie Cotugno to write a very messy, very complicated relationship, and this one definitely delivered. I have been a really big fan of Katie Cotugno for a while now, but I definitely liked her earlier books better than her later ones. So I was really pleased that You Say It First was more reminiscent of the earlier releases, in my opinion. This one is a dual perspective novel, and we are following a character named Meg who works at a nonprofit organization that does cold calling in order to help people register to vote. One night on her shift, she makes a phone call to this house in order to try to get someone to register, and she ends up on the phone with the person's son. That is our other main character, Colby, and the two of them have a very memorable and interesting and kind of frustrating conversation. They end up exchanging phone numbers and starting to text one another. They kind of end up becoming like the one person in each of their lives that they can be completely open and honest with because they don't live near each other, no one else knows them, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think that they both challenged each other in different ways because they're teenagers with a very limited worldview, but they each have really strong opinions about certain things and they come from just completely different worlds, so they have different experiences that they're bringing to the table. So as they continue to chat, they end up getting closer to one another, and then there is a romance that forms between them, and compromises definitely need to be made along the way. So I really liked this one for a lot of reasons. One of them being Meg had a really kind of strained friendship with her best friend Emily. Emily just kind of decides everything and Meg just kind of goes along with it and doesn't really know how to stand up to people. And Meg has been dealing with a lot with her parents having gone through a divorce, and she just doesn't like confrontation and doesn't like getting into arguments over anything. So she just a lot of times in her personal life finds it easier to just say okay and just accept what other people are telling her instead of standing up for herself. So I like that Colby kind of pushed her to get out of that and to stand up for herself, because to him, she had no problem saying anything and saying anything that she believed in. She had some really funny interactions with Colby's friends, which I loved, and I wish that more teenagers would be the way that Meg was. So the thing that really stuck out to me in this book was friendship, and again, like I really liked the friendship between Colby and Meg. I don't think that their relationship was super believable, which is why this one didn't get a full 5 stars from me. I think that they worked so much better being friends with each other than they do romantically. I just left the book feeling like it wasn't a forever relationship, which is fine because they're teenagers, so obviously like things are gonna change as they keep getting older, but I just didn't like believe that they would actually be dating. I was definitely just more interested in the progress that they were making in their own personal lives as opposed to them being like romantically involved. So overall, I really liked it. I had a very good time reading it. This is another one that I read pretty quickly because I love Katie's writing and I find it really easy to fall into, but it wasn't a new favorite for me, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Next, I read Shuri by Nick Stone. This is a Black Panther novel following Shuri, who is T'Challa's younger sister. She is the princess of Wakanda, but she is way more interested in science and technology and spending time in her lab than she is with like doing her duties as a princess. This is what Goodreads called an upper middle grade novel, so it was kind of like YA, but it read slightly young. I felt like the beginning read a little bit younger, but as I continued on, it seemed more like a YA novel than a middle grade novel in my personal opinion. I really enjoyed it. I really love Shuri as a character, so I was already excited going into it, and I'm obviously already familiar with Black Panther and the world in the MCU, so I already had that like previous knowledge going into it, and that definitely made me excited to pick it up to begin with. So in this book, we're following Shuri, and she is juggling a whole lot of things. She's trying to appease her mother, who is constantly wanting her to do things that princesses are supposed to do. She is trying to make a new Black Panther suit for her brother T'Challa, who is the Black Panther, and she is also trying to figure out the mystery of what is killing the heart-shaped herb that grows in Wakanda and is used to give the Black Panther their abilities. So they're coming up to Challenge Day, which is when someone can challenge the current Black Panther, and if they win and defeat them, they will be the new Black Panther. But in order to do so, they need to eat this herb. But the herb is like rapidly disappearing, so Shuri is really worried about what could happen, and she really wants to, you know, solve the mystery and cure the plant. But anytime that she brings it up, she's kind of met with resistance, and then also her family is like, well, are you thinking that T'Challa won't win if he's challenged? And she's like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we need to make sure that this herb will be available, because who knows, we've never had someone be Black Panther for this long. What if he needs more of it? So she has to do a lot of sneaking around and kind of going behind everyone's back to try to solve this mystery, because she's the only one that's really taking it very seriously. And a lot of it involves her teaming up with her best friend Kamara, who she Wasn't really sure if they were actually best friends, but I really liked the progression of their relationship through this novel. And I also really loved the different character cameos that we got through in here. So if you are aware of different characters within the Marvel Universe, I think that you will be really excited when you see some of the people that pop up in here. I also really loved all of the scenes between Shuri and T'Challa and just the way that she views him versus the way that other women view him. It was really funny. But I thought this was really well written, really entertaining. I really enjoyed it from start to finish. And if you're interested in picking it up, I also just found out that the audiobook is narrated by Anika Noni Rose, who's actually the voice of Tiana in The Princess and the Frog. So that might be a good way to go. Another thing that I really enjoyed that is irrelevant to my review of the content within the book is that it's actually all, I don't know if you can see it, but it's all written in like a dark purple font. So I just found that fun because I like colors. But I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I really hope that Nick Stone gets to write another Shuri novel because I would 100% read it. And then finally, I read The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants by Anne Brashares. This is the first book in the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series. There was a quartet originally, and then Anne wrote a book a little bit later on following the girls, I think as they turned 30. I actually never read that final book. I only read the original 4. But me and my 2 best friends, Alexa and Rachel, have decided that we wanted to reread the series, and we were going to read one a month. We kicked things off in June with this first book, and it was really fun to have them to talk about it with because all of us remembered loving this series, but it's been so long. Like, I read them over 15 years ago, I think. So I will say that it didn't really hold up for me. Oh, I think everyone knows what this is about, but just in case, the story follows 4 best friends who are about to spend their first summer apart from each other, and the night before they're all leaving to go to their different destinations, they discover a pair of jeans in Carmen's closet that she just happened to pick up at a thrift store one day and never tried on, never wore anything. And they find out that the jeans actually fit each of them like perfectly, despite all of them having very different body types and being different sizes. So they end up making kind of a pact that each of them will have a certain amount of time that they can spend with these jeans throughout the summer, and they'll get mailed to one another. They come up with like a predetermined order of who's going to have them, and they are each responsible for sending them to the next person, and they have like a couple of rules that go along with them too. The one thing that I will say is that I do feel like this book kind of broke me out of my reading slump. I read it in less than 24 hours, and it kind of like kickstarted me getting back into the groove of reading pretty often. So it was really fun that Alexa and Rachel had already finished it before me, so I just got to kind of live text them my thoughts as I was reading it. And it was funny to go into it with what I remember from the first time that I read it and having that totally change this time around. Because when I read it when I was in high school, I definitely remembered Lena being my favorite character. She was the one that went off to Greece, met like a cute boy named Kostos, and I just remember like loving her storyline. And this time around, I was kind of appalled at her storyline and like pretty surprised that it went the way that it did. And I was like, this would never fly. Like this, I can't imagine that this would get published nowadays. And then outside of that, I actually found her to be kind of boring. Like a lot of the girls had issues that they were dealing with that were like real issues, and Lena's main issue was that like she's too pretty and she doesn't know if she can trust anyone because she doesn't know if they actually like her for her or if they just like her because she's pretty, which is definitely like a valid thing, but it was just so insignificant compared to the things that the other girls were going through. I also remember loving Bee, and I was just cringing so hard over her relationship with her soccer coach and her trying to like go really hard after him even though he kept telling her like nothing could happen. I remember when I was in high school, like rooting for them because she really liked him so much, but now as an adult reading it, I was like, oh God, like stop, leave this man alone and just like find a boy your own age that you can date. And then I also found Tibby's storyline to be kind of boring too, although I do really like Bailey and I definitely cried with everything going on with her. But I found that this time around, Carmen was definitely my favorite character. She is planning on going to spend the summer with her father. She'd only gotten to spend like like weekends at a time with him, never like a huge chunk of time. And she had all of these plans for like father-daughter things to do, and he picks her up and she immediately finds out that he is getting remarried, and he takes her to his new house with his new family, and it's really hard for her to adjust and to see him happy with these new people when she never had this kind of childhood with him. So her storyline was really compelling and really heartbreaking, and she did make some bad decisions, but I also was like, I understand where you're coming from. So overall, if I were reading this for the first time now, I would not have liked this, but because I have the nostalgia attached to it, it was enjoyable to revisit and to revisit the characters, and I am actually excited to continue reading because I remember the books getting better as they went along. I liked reevaluating some of my past opinions, and it's interesting to read it like knowing what I know now and being a person who's had more experiences than I had as a high schooler. I'm excited to read the next one. I'm really hoping that the other books will hold up better than this one did. I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. So those are the next 5 books that I read. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you read any of the books that I mentioned. I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of mixed opinions on The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I know a lot of people really loved the book, and I really wanted to, so I'm kind of sad that I didn't. But yeah, and it actually won't be too much longer until you get another recent reads video from me, because I just have to finish the book I'm currently reading and then I can film another one of these. So I'm really glad that I'm like getting back into the swing of reading. That is all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!